Hello, this is Josh Belk with the Belk on Business podcast. Today we're going to talk a little bit about entity compliance as we move into a new year in 2024. Most of these items, not all these items, all these items are kind of items that kind of need to be mindful of every year. One of these items is going to be new for this year, and we'll talk about that here in just a moment. So every year, of course, you think of kind of the obvious compliance pieces, filing of your annual tax returns, for example. Those are usually don't get missed, and if they do get missed, usually it's kind of purposeful. But there are kind of other requirements that are out there that sometimes do get missed, and it can create complications. And I'll give you an example. If you don't have the proper reports filed, say on the state level or local level, if you happen to own real estate and you want to go sell that real estate, they may not allow you to do so. If you're wanting to go and conduct business or pull a permit, do something like that, and you don't have the proper registrations in place at the state level, at the local level, they may not allow for you to pull a permit. And so there's a number of reasons why you want to make sure that your entity is compliant. And the main reason is just to make sure that you conduct business and can continue to conduct business going forward. So I have 6 points here and kind of 6 different areas to consider, to look at, and to make sure that that you and your business are compliant in these particular areas. And so these compliance pieces are and this isn't all encompassing. Okay, this is just kind of a little bit more of a narrow area. However, it is at kind of a broader level. And so thinking about different types of areas in your business where you conduct business. And this goes beyond just physical location, although it's a huge part of it. Most people know that they need to register, say, for example, at the state level, if they're going to have a physical location in that particular state. Okay, now that's not always the case. Some people, think that, well, they can register their business in, Delaware or whatever the case may be. And a lot of that's kind of antiquated thinking, but you go through and you set up in Delaware or Wyoming, but you actually have a physical location in Tennessee, for example, or Florida, and then you think you don't need to register in Florida until you go and want to try to conduct business, and they find out you're not registered in Florida, and so then you end up having to register there anyway. So make sure that wherever your physical location is at, you need to register. But sometimes things get missed. For example, am I conducting business in that state, but may not have a physical location in that state? Okay, if I go on site and have a booth, say, for example, at a location in another state, is there some sort of sales tax registration requirement? If I'm selling products, or maybe I'm conducting services in a state, I fly in and conduct services there, does it require some type of registration? And so it may be at the state level or maybe at the local level. I'll give you an example. We had a client that was going and conducting business in Las Vegas this last year. They have some of their own unique requirements. And we weren't, at the firm level, we weren't completely up to speed on what all needed to happen there. So we had to do some research. But the client was at least let us know, this is the area that we're going in. What do I need to do? Do you have employees in states? This is another really big area. And so we have, with a lot of our clients, we have clients that have remote employees. We have remote employees at the firm level. Okay, and so you need to find out if you have an employee physically in that location, does that require some sort of a state registration? So with physical location, do you have on-site sales? Is there some sort of, even if you're selling remotely, is there a requirement? And so all these things need to be taken into consideration. So number one, register your business in any state that you conduct business that requires registration. And I just mentioned that. And so, and this can go all the way down to the local level. So you do have some states, and I'll give you an example, like Ohio, which is, we're here in Indiana, but the state next to us in Ohio, they have multiple levels of tax compliance and registration compliance. So here in Indiana, most everything is done at the state level. Occasionally, there might be a county or local if you're trying to pull a permit to do a job, for example. But overall, registration most of the time here in Indiana just requires at the state level. But if you're in Ohio, for example, if you end up with it can drill. And even Pennsylvania is very similar. They get all the way down to the local municipality level where there has to be returns filed. So if you own a piece of property there, you have an employee there, whatever the case may be, there are filings. Make sure that you're aware of that. Okay, so income tax, local tax, sales tax. This is one huge area over the last few years that's kind of created some complications for businesses. And so you need to understand what are your sales tax requirements. So you're going into a new area, or you're selling in a new area, and is that going to require some sort of a registration? Payroll tax, etc. So next, number 2, annual report requirements with the Secretary of State or the Department of State. Most states, and they're called different things, most states call their Secretary of State's office Secretary of State. Some Department of State may have different types of names, but most states have an annual requirement. Now, some states is every other year. Indiana, for example, you file your what's called a business entity report every other year. Most states are annual. And most states, you actually go to the Secretary of State's or the Department of State's website every year and you register. And they have different time during the year that report may need to be filed. Some of them, every business registered by a certain date. In some states, other businesses, like an example, for example, here in Indiana, it's every other year on the month that you registered the business initially. So it can be different dates, but make sure you understand those registration requirements. Some states, like Texas, for example, the report gets filed, that annual report gets filed with your annual tax return. So you have your annual franchise tax return, and there's also another registration form that goes in to the comptroller's office in order to keep the entity active every year. So make sure you understand what those annual requirements are, where they need to be filed at, and make sure that that's being done. So annual report requirements with your Secretary of State's office, and this goes for any states you're conducting business in. Number 3, obtain licenses, permits, and registrations with local municipalities. I talked about this. So if you're going into even a local area, so if you need to know if you're operating in a state that has that requirement. So if you're operating, for example, in Philadelphia, and you own some real estate in Ohio, you may have a local municipality that's going to end up sending you a letter stating, we found out that you own property. And believe you me, they are very, very kind of maverick about this. So it's almost like Big Brother to where, you walk in and it's like, you have people running after you looking for reports and filings. It's kind of nuts. But as we're finding, and even with this quote unquote Corporate Transparency Act, this far-reaching government overreaching of our government, and wanting to stick their nose and want to know what's going on in every business in the country. That it's getting the money grab's getting kind of crazy. The quote unquote, we need more transparency, that type of thing, and the government needs to know for whatever reason. Then I want to get political here. You want to know what's going on in the businesses of what's going on in every business in the United States, but you're going to let any idiot just walk across the border and become a drain on our economy. So it just absolutely none of this makes any sense to me. It's just, but I kind of as an accountant and as an advisor to our clients, I just simply state this is the environment that we're in. And so we just simply going to have to comply if we're going to continue to conduct business or choose a different type of business that doesn't have these compliance requirements, et cetera. But just to be aware of what they are and to make sure that you're following them. So if you are operating in a particular area, you buy real estate in a particular area, you conduct business in a certain area, make sure you understand, is there some sort of local municipality that you need to register with? So licenses, permits, usually, if you're in the construction industry, for example, a lot of times that you need to go to the local municipality, courthouse, whatever, pull a permit. But it's usually kind of those other things as far as if there's an annual tax return, whether it's income tax or sales tax or something to that effect that needs to be filed. Next, and we just mentioned this, the Corporate Transparency Act that was passed, they have what is called this BOI or Beneficial Ownership Report that needs to be filed. Now, for 2024, for this year, you have 90 days if the business was in effect prior to 2024. So essentially you have until the end of March for this report to be filed. If it's a newly established entity, you have 30 days to file the report. So you want to make sure if you do end up, if you have a business that was already in existence going into the year, you're going to have to go to the Financial Crimes Unit website, the FinCEN website, and file this BOI report. For our clients, we'll be following up here in the next week or so as far as finding out who does and does not need for us to file, or at least make them aware of it for some that may not be aware of this particular requirement. So essentially, if you have over 25% ownership interest in a business, there are certain types of businesses that are excluded. There's a lot of rules out there, and it's way too broad for this particular podcast. But just be aware, if you do own a business, if you own over 25%, or you have some sort of a controlling or financial interest in the business, you may have a filing requirement that a new requirement for 2024 that you'll need to hop online and file, or have your accountant or your attorney file it for you. So that's number 4. Number 5, generate a list with a timeline for reports that do need to be filed. To understand what reports need to be filed when. This can go everywhere from payroll tax filings. So you may have a payment schedule, for example. You may be a 5-day filer. There's a report that gets filed every quarter. So you should really have a timeline of these things to kind of understand this is when things need to be paid. This is when things need to be filed. And so you can do this whether it's payroll taxes, so federal level, at the state level, what requirements do we have? Do we have a report, some sort of filings that need to be done every month? Am I an annual filer with certain things? Same thing with sales tax. Sales tax generally is either monthly or annual. Some states it is quarterly. Okay, so understand what are your requirements in the state that you're conducting business in. So do I have a compliance check mark? Do I have some sort of a document that I need to send in? How frequently does it need to be filed, and when does it need to be paid? Annual federal tax returns, usually this is the one that most of the time doesn't get missed. Understanding if you have an entity that's a corporation or partnership, you have until March to file personals in April, unless you're on extension, etc. So understanding when your tax returns need to be filed. Your state tax or franchise tax returns, when do those need to be filed? Most of the time they follow hand in hand with the IRS, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you have franchise tax or income tax filings at the entity level that's past the March 15th or April 15th filing deadline. And then also your state and local requirements. So generate that list, what needs to be filed, where do we need to file, and when does it need to be filed? And so to make sure you're keeping track of that. Now, if you're leaning into an accounting firm, law firm, etc., a lot of times they will help you with this, but I think it's really, really good that you understand as a business owner, or you have somebody on your team that's keeping track of this and making sure that it's being done. Otherwise, what happens sometimes, I know at our end, we have clients that they just do it all themselves. They go and they end up trying to sell a property, for example, and find out they can't close because they just missed a registration that needed to go in. And then lastly, number 6, know what triggers a compliance action. So understanding, before you ever go through and you hire an employee in a state, is there some sort of a compliance requirement there? Okay, and most of the time there is. So most of the time, if you're hiring an employee in another state and you're going to end up withholding taxes in that state, many times it's going to require you to register your business in that state. So understanding what triggers compliance. So where it gets even a little bit more difficult, or a lot more difficult, is when it comes to sales tax. Understanding, where have you actually established nexus, and is there a state requirement to not just register at the state level, but also with a state Department of Revenue, for example, for sales tax. But how frequently does it need to be filed? If it's just a one-time event, what are the requirements? Understanding when you're going, before you go into a new area, whether you're hiring an employee there, whether you're going to decide to conduct business there, whether it's a physical location or simply just somebody flying in and just conducting business for a week or two. Is there some sort of a compliance requirement there? And this will not just sales tax, but also for income tax. For example, you have someone go into New York City, okay, or New York State, and they're there for working just for a week. We had a situation with a client here just in the last month or so where they had that issue. They went through, and then New York's looking at them because they're now the business they work for is required to withholding tax because you had a person working there, and so it can really create some issues. So just make sure you understand what triggered a compliance action. So whether it's new employee, new type of revenue stream, new business location, location where you're selling or providing services, and then remote and online sales. So understanding all of these different areas can and most likely will trigger some sort of a new compliance piece for you and your business. So just really this particular podcast, just to try to bring awareness as to these compliance requirements, and this is not getting any less. Okay, we're kind of seeing a lot of new regulation, a lot of more, and it goes beyond just government oversight. I really think it's becoming government intrusion into our businesses. But just to make sure that those areas that you are complying with those particular areas, otherwise, obviously, it can make life very difficult for you as a business owner to conduct business if you are not keeping up with these particular areas. Once again, this is Josh Belk with the Belk on Business podcast. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, please consider doing so. Would love to hear any feedback if you have any to provide. Have a wonderful day.